I've been noticing that you've been doing a lot of outdoor monogamous training partner training.
Yeah.
So you've been moving the mats out of the school, or how have you been doing that?
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning. So the we shut down March 12th. We like my number one priority is always going to be the health and safety of the students. Like jiu-jitsu is amazing. It is a core part of my life. The mats will be here when the pandemic is over. And so I think it's really important that we do what's responsible for our students and we do what's responsible for the community. So at first we just shut down before the government told us we had to. And we're going to stay closed until we our indoor physical space. We're going to stay closed until we feel like it's safe to open. But of course, we do this because we're passionate about it, not because it's not a business, it's a way of life. And so you want to get back to training. Everybody wants to get back to training, but we're not willing to compromise on health and safety. So at first, we just did daily live streamed classes. And there are limits to what you can achieve with that, right? Like you and I can talk over the internet about jiu-jitsu, and that's awesome, until eventually we want to grapple. And so we still do those live streams just because it's a way to stay connected to the academy, to do so safely, but we had to add some things in. So we're also doing remote events that just help people stay engaged with jiu-jitsu and the martial arts. Like we're doing a fight watch along.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like then the UFC's on, you all log into Zoom as well, or what? How does that work?
Pretty much, although we're starting with, we log into Zoom and we have a Zoom room, and we're doing that mostly with Fight to Win, although we will do it with the UFC. We're actually doing a rewatch of ADCC 2005, which, because a lot of my students are white and blue belts that weren't around to see the halcyon days of Roger Gracie and Marcelo Garcia, and I feel like everybody should watch that stuff. And so those are things that we can do over the internet totally safely that keep people engaged with martial arts. So then we're like, okay, how can we actually build out some training, especially as the pandemic progresses and there are more sort of structures in place to protect public health. And so as we're learning about this disease, indoor transmission is really common and dangerous, and outdoor transmission less so. And so at this point, we're talking about ways to minimize risk. So our outdoor classes, unfortunately, we had we were going to expand anyway, because our mat space is getting too small. And so I had bought about 1,800 square feet of rolling mats that were supposed to be in our new facility, which thankfully we didn't sign a lease on before COVID happened. And so we have these rolling mats. And so every Saturday, and we're probably going to expand this because these classes have been really popular, we roll out those mats in the street. We put down tarps so that the bottom of the mats don't get dirty. So we put down tarps, roll out mats, tape those mats together. Once the mats are taped together, we tape off 8x8 squares so that each drilling partner stays within those squares. We have chalk, and we chalk off the street so that spectators can know where the appropriate social distancing is. And then we do drilling classes, and I teach that with a dedicated uke. And I've encouraged everybody, we're matching up our students with one dedicated quarantine drilling partner. Some people are lucky enough to have a romantic partner who trains or a roommate who trains, and so those guys are better off than everybody else. They have the ready-made partners. And then I just go teach in the street. And it's been really fun.
How do you not get run over?
So I'm glad you asked. Everybody's scared of jiu-jitsu guys. That's why we don't get run over. No, that's not it. So
I take your 3,000-pound pickup truck and I'm going to, threaten it with my heel hook.
You just got to butterfly sweep it. You can Tomonage
cool. Makes
truck.
Sense.
It'll get me on all those BJJ viral sites one way or another. But what happened was, so in Bellingham, we're right in downtown Bellingham. And part of the reason we chose to be right in downtown Bellingham is I have always believed that in order to spread jiu-jitsu, people have to see jiu-jitsu. A big part of why the sport didn't grow in the early days, I think, is that most academies weren't academies, they were gyms. And you walked into this warehouse on the wrong side of the tracks, and you walked in and there were a bunch of, you didn't know what to expect. Yeah. And maybe there were a bunch of young athletic guys with their shoulders up around their ears and tatted up and angry, and it was a fight club. And if you don't see into that, you're probably going to be scared of the unknown. And if you go into there and that's the only type of person that's there, and those types of folks a lot of those folks are my best friends as well. So like, I'm not trying to stereotype any particular type of person, but if that's all that's out there, people aren't going to want to do jiu-jitsu. And so I always believed that I could create an academy that would anchor a downtown area, not just as a martial arts academy, but like hey, this is the jiu-jitsu lifestyle. This is what we're about. The jiu-jitsu that we know as people who do it, where it's this friendly, technical, yes, difficult, yes, like hard and painful and savage enterprise, but also something that like folk do who are normal and folk do because they love it. And so we got this space downtown that has these big picture windows because I wanted people to walk by and say, oh, I've heard of jiu-jitsu. Is that what it is? Those people look like they're having a lot of fun, as opposed to like being unaware of what happens in the shady warehouse on the wrong side of the tracks. And so that really worked out. And so we're right next to we're right next to this amazing taco place, the couple of great bars, terrific coffee shop, and the best music venue in town. And so life was perfect until the pandemic happened, when all those businesses had to close. And so now, as the pandemic, trust me, this is all relevant to your question. So now as the pandemic progresses, the health guidelines won't let those folks open fully inside either, and nor should they, right? But those folks need to make money. Those folks need to keep their businesses open. And so our town came to some of us business owners and said, what if we were to shut down this block and just make it a plaza? And then that way, restaurant customers can spill out into the street for outdoor seating. Same with bars. Bands can play, and you can hear them even if you're not like all sort of jumbled up into an area. And so I said, what if I were to roll mats out in the street? And because I was worried that I would freak out the normals, right? But they loved it. So the Downtown Business Association thought it was super fun. And it's really labor intensive for us because, rolling out 1,600 square feet of mats every day and then putting them away is tough. But that's what we're willing to do. And so far, folks have really responded to it.
Yeah. I'm just astounded that there isn't more outdoor training. I'm seeing it a little. If I use Instagram as my lens upon the martial arts world, I see that some clubs are doing outdoor training, and I think it's a fantastic idea. I mean, I went down a really deep rabbit hole on aerosol transmission, respiratory droplets, and started looking up how long aerosols stay in the air, and air exchange rates in different kinds of rooms, and how quickly basically contaminated air gets moved out of a space. And it's totally obvious and evident from the data that we now have that we didn't have 4 months ago, or we didn't realize was relevant 4 months ago, that ventilation is one of the huge keys to this. This is not the only thing, but it's gigantic, and that training outdoors is obviously going to be way, way, way better than indoors, or if you are indoors, having at least all the doors and windows open. And when you look at schools or school districts that opened and there was a total disaster versus school districts that opened, I'm just talking about regular schools now, versus schools that opened and it wasn't a disaster, it really, I wonder if how much of it was the emphasis on ventilation and keeping the windows open. I know Israel was a disaster, and I wonder, maybe it's just really hot in Israel and they kept all the windows and doors closed and had old air conditioning pumping the virus through the building again and again and again, and maybe that created it. Whereas, I don't know, I think Denmark opened fairly benignly, and maybe a part of it was that they had doors and windows open because it's not as hot in Denmark and they had better ventilation. I'm just astounded that there isn't more outdoor training, at least in the summer. I mean, I get it. If you're in the Pacific Northwest in December, that's going to be a lot trickier to do your strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so first of all, let me say I'm really grateful to you for all the research that you're doing and helping to sort of distill that information for jiu-jitsu folks. And your understanding is really similar to mine. And there's one study that says outdoor transmission rates are it's 19 to 20 times less likely outdoors than it is indoors. And we're going to have to get back to training indoors eventually. And so we're doing some things with that as well. Like we've installed the medical grade HEPA filters in every room. We're going to train with the doors and windows open and all that stuff. And when we're ready to do that, we'll do that. But I agree. I'm really surprised that more folks aren't doing outdoor training. And part of the reason that we're doing it and why we're building it out now is that I want to take advantage. First of all, we wanted to test it to make sure if it was going to work and people were going to enjoy it. But now that we know that people are, I really want to take advantage of the summer and just be Another thing that I would recommend to folks, back when I was in North Carolina, and we had a bunch of I helped start this super fight card called Toro Cup. Toro BJJ runs it. It's a charity super fight card. It's raised about $35,000 for various charities. And we did one that was outdoors at the farmer's market. And they had this sort of, at the Durham, North Carolina farmer's market, they have this sort of outdoor wind and rain shield. And so, which I think is sort of the ideal thing. And in Bellingham, we have something similar. So if folks are considering doing something like that, but are like, oh, it rains a lot in my place, see if your community has something like that. Because that way, even if, you can't do it in a torrential downpour or a hurricane, of course, but like being outdoors and not like, the real hassle is just moving the mats in and out. And so if you can do that without worry of, now we're going to have to roll them up after 15 minutes of training because we're getting rained on, then that'll solve a bunch of the problems, I think.
It could be like the Japanese winter training sessions that they used to do in judo. Yeah. When in the middle of winter, they turn off the heat, they open all the doors, all the windows, and they train in the freezing cold just to toughen people up.
Yeah, I see that. I see that stuff happening in Kazakhstan and places like that too, like judo throws into snowdrifts, and I'm like, I'm not that tough. And maybe I was at one time, but I'm not anymore. In North Carolina, we did the opposite, and like I miss this training a lot. We would, particularly one of my instructors, Jake Whitfield, he has a school in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And he doesn't do this anymore. But back when we were training for competitions, and in North Carolina, it's the southern U.S., so it gets super hot and super humid. And he would lock us inside and shut all the doors and windows and wouldn't let us turn on the fans. And we would just go hard until we couldn't go anymore. And after one of the, and like, it's one of those things that I'm nostalgic for because it didn't happen to me yesterday. It happened to me 5 years ago. But like after one of those training sessions, I had to drink 4 liters of water before I even felt like a human being anymore. And like, so
it's the original type 3 fun.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, now we're getting into, I'm going to pivot a little bit to darker territory. I think the number of schools I see that started by progressing by saying COVID's a hoax. This is a hoax. This isn't real. The death rate is 0.0000001% or some, I'll say nonsense like that. So they pivoted from COVID's fake to COVID's almost not deadly at all to we're just going to have to power right through this and let the old people protect themselves. It's like at every point when presented with options as like, who do we believe here? They've picked the one that's more conducive to doing what they want to do, right? If I've said before that if instead of COVID, we were dealing with, if the scientists had discovered some bizarre form of radiation from Alpha Centauri, and there's nothing you can do about it, the only thing that helps protect you is exercise, a lot of these school owners would be going, science! Science! Science says you have to train jiu-jitsu. Whereas now, a lot of them are going, nah, screw the science stuff. You can't trust science stuff. We just have to, either it's not deadly or it's a total hoax or, yeah, it's real, but we're just going to have to power through it. And, you're young, you're probably not going to die from it anyway, which actually is true. Like the average jiu-jitsu student is probably not going to die from this. But we are going to spread it to a whole lot of people who are going to die from it. It's really depressing to see that at every juncture, some people have gone like the opposite way of what, mainstream science or the scientific consensus at the time, which has evolved, was saying.
Yeah. I don't disagree with anything you've said, and I have a lot of thoughts on this. And so I teach formal logic and journalism at a local college, and what I always tell my students is you should be much more skeptical of things you want to believe than of things you don't want to believe, because all human beings are subject to confirmation bias, right? And people that love jiu-jitsu really love jiu-jitsu. So you know what I want to believe? I want to believe it's safe for me to train and it won't hurt anybody. I desperately want to believe that. So it's incumbent on me to really interrogate that, to be like, is that true? Because I really want to believe that. And so I'm not without sympathy for the folks that did want to believe, the various permutations of what you talked about. But the evidence just is so overwhelming.
The COVID minimizing option.
Right. And the other thing too is like, and what's lame about it is, I think a lot of people don't see the consequences because they themselves are young, athletic, and in good health. But we do have, I think, we have an obligation to take care of folks in our community, particularly folks that are either unable to take care of themselves or are at greater vulnerability from things like this. Like, yeah, it might not be me that dies from COVID, but will it be one of my students with asthma? Will it be one of my students who's overweight, who's trying to use jiu-jitsu as a tool to improve their life and like get better, get in better health? Will it be somebody's grandma, right? And I said this the other day to a student. I was like, the only thing that would make me feel worse than not being able to train jiu-jitsu is knowing something I did caused harm to someone else and there's an old episode of The Twilight Zone that I think about sometimes, where these strangers show up, mysterious strangers in a suit. They show up with a briefcase and they go to this couple. And they open the briefcase, and in the briefcase is a buzzer. And they say, if you hit the buzzer, you get a certain amount of money. Maybe it's $2 million. But someone will die. And it won't be someone you know. Don't worry about it. And of course, spoiler alert, at the end of the episode, they decide to touch the buzzer. So, okay, cool. Here's your briefcase full of money. And they ask what will happen to the buzzer. And the mysterious stranger says, oh, don't worry. We'll deliver it to someone you don't know. and I used to think, like, who would ever hit that buzzer? And now, unfortunately, I'm really disappointed to learn that there are a lot of folk that are out there who would be jamming on it like a Jeopardy buzzer, right? And it makes me sad.
I better hit it before somebody else hits it.
Yeah, and it makes me sad because to me, jiu-jitsu is a philosophy. Jiu-jitsu is a philosophy about finding the most efficient, most effective, best, and most optimal way of doing a thing. And jiu-jitsu is science, not magic. It is the opposite of magical thinking. If you and I train, Stephan, and you catch me in an omoplata with a setup I've never seen before, and you submit me, oh, clearly that worked. Stephan's setup works. If you try something and it doesn't work, then okay, now we repeat the experiment and we see. But I have to deal with that. I have to deal with the reality of what just happened to me. Conversely, if you tell me through the miracle of the internet, like, hey man, I have this setup and I can't show it to you, it's too deadly, but if we ever train, trust me, you don't want any of this. It's like, okay, well, that's a hypothesis that we can't test. That is magical thinking. And so one of the things that I would encourage other jiu-jitsu folks who, we talked about probability before too, right? Everybody has something to offer and we can learn something from everyone. But the probability of a white belt who's trained jiu-jitsu less than a year teaching me something that is valid against elite competition is much less than if you or Fabio Gurgel or John Thomas or one of the guys that you have for instructionals, if they teach me a thing, that is much more likely to be useful. And that concept exists in other professions too.